Hello, and help me welcome Mark Allegro. Mark, welcome to People's View.
Thank you, Carl. It's nice to be here.
Tell the people what we want to talk about. We got to do it again. Hello, and help me welcome Mark Allegro. Mark, welcome to People's View, and tell the people what you want to talk about today.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's nice to be here, and I want to talk about the 2020 election. That's all you hear about these days, but I hope to bring a little bit different perspective to it, my own unique way of thinking.
All right. Well, whether it's unique or not, it's going to be a unique election, I think, next year.
In some ways, yes. And in other ways, not necessarily. I have, qualifier here. I don't know about your audience, but me, I'm a Republican and a conservative, so you know which way I want it to turn out. And so I want to talk a little bit about the prospects for how that might happen. And so I want to deliver some good news, but I also want to just deliver a stern warning to the people out there.
Well, that ought to be interesting.
Good news, bad news. It's always the same thing.
Yeah. Well, tell us where you want to start.
Well, I like sports analogies, and I like deductive reasoning. Ever since I was a kid, I was interested in being a detective. I used to read Encyclopedia Brown and Sherlock Holmes, and I latched on to deductive reasoning. Well, I never became a detective, but I did become a scientist. And you use that kind of reasoning every day at the lab bench and in your office. So I want to present people with a little bit of fodder for deductive reasoning, and it's in the form of a football game, one play in a football game.
I see, okay. That's a unique experience for us.
Well, and people are going to see that it's easy to draw conclusions if you're objective and are not afraid to use deductive reasoning. So the issue here is that these are two teams that nobody will recognize. I chose them for that reason. It's a high school game, I think. There's no scoreboard and there's no game clock, so you don't know what the score is. You don't know how much time is left in the game. But your viewers are going to be able to watch one play, and from that, like magic, they're going to be able to tell how late in the game it is, they're going to be able to tell who's winning, and we're going to be able to draw a couple of other conclusions from it. This is deductive reasoning in action. So if we can run that one 25-second play.
Let's do it.
Let's see if I can view it over here too.
Oh my God, man, come on! Let it go! Come on, pass the turn! Sunshine up. You seen that shit?
Here it goes.
Here we go.
Alright guys, sorry, it's not working. 1 second. Do you guys see the play now?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. And I'll have my editor cut this in.
Oh my God, man, come on! Let it go! Come on, pass the turn! You fuck sunshine up. You seen that shit?
Okay, I think we're ready to go again. The play is complete. So for those of you who aren't familiar out there, somebody pointed this out to me the last time I showed this. Not everybody knows what a Hail Mary pass is, because not everybody's a football fan. What you just saw was a Hail Mary pass. It's an act of desperation by one team. So just from watching that one play, without seeing a clock, without knowing the score, without even knowing the teams, we know that the team in black is losing, and we know that it's very late in the game. In fact, that was probably the very last play of the game, which is typically when a Hail Mary pass is thrown. And there's a couple of interesting things about it, though. We can also tell that the score, even though the team in black is losing, the score is close. Because if it was the last play in the game and they were losing by 35 points, they wouldn't have bothered throwing a Hail Mary pass, right? So that means they had a chance to win. It also means that the team in white had to work their hardest to make sure that that Hail Mary pass didn't succeed. So the defenders with the white jerseys had to race downfield with the receivers from the black team. They had to go into the end zone. They had to position themselves to leap as high as they could and smack that ball away. Because if they didn't, they might lose at the very end of the game. Now, that is so much like politics in the United States
Definitely.
right now. So what can we tell from what's going on right now? The Democrats are losing. They're losing, and we can tell they're losing. And here's what's more important. They know they're losing because they're just throwing bombs. They're throwing Hail Mary passes and praying, if they prayed, they're praying that somebody could catch it, right? So they're losing, and it's late in the game. They're on the verge of losing the game. But just like in that football game that we watched, it's close. And if we don't race downfield with them and give it our best shot to knock that ball away, we could lose. Except the stakes are much higher than a high school football game. We could lose this republic. So the good news is that the America haters are losing. And the stern warning I want to issue to everyone is that we must not take that for granted. We must play like those guys in the white jerseys did, as if everything is at stake and we need to swat the ball away.
Very good. I kind of agree with you that the circumstances do fit the little story you told. So what are we going to do?
Well, just let me expand on that a little bit, and then I'll talk about what we need to do. They're losing, and they know they're losing, and we can see that. And how we know it is in the field of candidates that have presented themselves, and in the issues and the way they're addressing the issues. So first of all, you start off with 25 candidates. I think now we're down to 21. And if you look at that field, it's a bad and a desperate field. Now, in 2016, the Republicans had a huge field too. But out of those 16 or 17 that ran, at least on paper, almost everyone was a qualified candidate. In fact, it's fair to say that on paper they were all qualified candidates, and then you may like or not like any particular handful of them. But they were all decent candidates. This field is just rife with candidates that have no business even running. Right? You've got a mayor of a small Indiana town, a town that's not faring well. You have first-term senators with no executive experience. And the best one of all is the guy who's at the top right now, who's headed into his third loss in running for the presidency. So I'm talking about Joe Biden, of course. And you're looking at a fellow who has yet, in 2 previous attempts, to make it through the Iowa caucuses. He's a bad candidate. He's a terrible candidate. He's always been a bad candidate. But suddenly he finds himself at the top of the field. Now, is it because he took candidate lessons sometime in the past few years?
No, quite.
Or woke up with an ingenious idea implanted in his head? No. It's that the rest of the field is really that bad. Right? So that's another way that we know that these guys are in trouble. The other thing, which is, I find in some ways most interesting, I always used to like to follow on realclearpolitics.com. They put out what has become pretty popular and is known as a poll of polls, or an average of polls. And so what they do is they gather up all the polls by CNN, Washington Post, CBS, Rasmussen, all of them. And it's a constant and ongoing thing, and they average them. And every couple of days, there's a little flock of new polls that they post and they calculate in, and they show a trend line that goes with each of the candidates. Now, what's most interesting is that the trend lines really have not changed. So if you listen to the mainstream media, as some people call it, I have another name for it. If you listen to the mainstream media, you would hear that Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke is his real name, is surging in the polls. Or Kamala Harris is surging in the polls. And that Elizabeth Warren is surging in the polls. In reality, from the very day that they started reporting these polls back in early January of this year, there's been almost no change in the polls. Back then, before Joe Biden announced his candidacy, he was at about 27, 28% support. If you look today, over 8 months later, he's at 28% support. If you look at Robert Francis O'Rourke, he was at less than 5% support in these polls. And these are averages, which itself is not scientific anyway, but whatever. And now if you look at Robert Francis O'Rourke, Beto, he's at about 3-4% in the polls, same as he was 8 months ago. If you look at Bernie Sanders, 8 months ago, he was at 17%. Guess what he's at today? He's at 17%.
These aren't the average that you're saying.
Yeah, these are the average, right? Now, the only one who's come up, actually, is Elizabeth Warren at the moment. Others have bumped up briefly, and then they've sunk down. Elizabeth Warren has bumped up. So far, it's brief, and we'll see where her trend line goes after this. What I'm getting at here is nothing is changing. We've had 2 debates. We've had these people campaigning all over the country, and nothing has changed. Joe Biden, who's a poor candidate, still manages to garner about 28% of the support. What does this tell you? Well, I'll tell you what it tells me. It tells me that there's still some fraction of Democrats, a little over a quarter of them, who still are connected with reality and with our traditions. And they're looking for some place to run. And that someplace is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is shelter from the other 23 loonies in the field. Unfortunately for them, he's a terrible candidate. I don't know which one to root for, to tell you the truth. If Joe Biden wins the nomination, and I think there's a good bet that he will, a lot of Democrats are going to be disenchanted. All the Bernie bros, they're going to stay home. The Warren ones, they're pretty much the same as the Bernie bros. Kamala Harris is not even worth discussing as we get closer to the convention. She may be chosen as a vice presidential candidate because she has all of the qualifications that a Democrat candidate, well, almost all of the qualifications that a Democrat candidate would look for. She's not particularly smart. She's not particularly well-spoken. She's not particularly experienced, but she is a minority candidate and she is a female candidate. And those are the 2 most important things for the Democrats right now. So here's a real possibility, still sticking with what I entertain as possibilities for the Democrat side. Remember in 2016, there was all this talk from the mainstream media about a brokered convention, and that Donald Trump was not going to garner enough delegates to win on the first round of voting. Well, that was manure. Anybody who watched and followed the trends know that Donald Trump was on target to collect the necessary number of delegates months in advance. But in this case, in 2020, there are very real prospects that it's going to take more than 1 round of voting at the Democrat convention. Because of the rule changes after 2016, The superdelegates are not allowed to vote until the second round. Okay? So Joe Biden can't count on the superdelegates in the first round like Hillary Clinton could when they were all bought and paid for already by the DNC. So right now, with the vote split, 30% for Biden roughly, 20% for the other two, there's a very good possibility that nobody's going to collect the number of delegates for first round victory. And then it's going to go to the second round. And then the superdelegates are going to vote for Joe Biden. And then you're going to have the same whining and screaming that you had from Bernie Sanders in 2016, except it's going to be coming from more directions. At the end of the day, they're going to be left with a candidate. Let me back up a little bit. I ran for Congress in Massachusetts in the 9th District. I know how much work it was. They call you Honorable Carl Seidel because you've held and hold office. You understand what it takes to run for office. For Congress, it's bloody murder. It's 7 days a week. It's from the time you get up in the morning until the time you stumble into bed at night. I couldn't imagine what it would be like running for a statewide race, like Senate or governor. And I think it's beyond all of our imagination what it must be like running for the presidency. Now, granted, you have a lot more money available and you have a lot more support, so you have people that can carry you to bed. But Joe Biden is going to be 78 years old, and as a man who's over 60, I can tell you that a 78-year-old man cannot effectively run a national campaign. It just can't happen. And I know, I wouldn't want to do it myself at 70 years old.
Well, I think you see some of that in what he's doing now.
I think that's exactly right. They always say Joe Biden is a gaffe machine.
Yeah.
Well, he is, but he's not really a gaffe machine. He's just a dummy. And all right, my language is a little more colorful than you might use. He's a dummy in my book. But here's the problem. All right, yeah, let's put it this way. He's not as sharp-witted as you would like to see a presidential candidate. How's
Well,
that?
he's probably could be said that his memory is what a 78-year-old might expect.
Right, and then you go into that point. I mean, look, I'm 62. I go down the basement to get a tool because I'm working on something in the garage, and by the time I get halfway down the steps, I'm saying, what did I come down here for?
Right.
Or I come back up with 3 other things in my hands, and I say, the one damn thing I wanted to get, I
still
left
down
behind,
there.
right? You know that. We all know that. Joe Biden is, and it's worse when there's pressure.
Yeah, definitely.
It's worse when you're tired and when there's pressure. And if people want to describe Joe Biden as a gaffe machine now, it's going to get, I almost feel bad for him. And I say almost.
So what do we have to do to protect what we
All right.
want to happen?
So here's the deal. Here's the stern warning. Here's where I will probably lose some friends, okay? I came up from Massachusetts, where state rep races were very intense, and there was a fair amount of political activity. To New Hampshire, where there's still a fair amount of political activity, but in very small circles. Now, what's been happening over the past decade, give or take a few years, is that the Democrats have been going out and registering voters. Now, this is going to seem funny to some people. It's going to seem obvious, but it's true. The number one determinant of how a person votes on Election Day is their party affiliation. So if you're a registered Democrat, the chances are huge that you're going to vote Democrat. And if you're a registered Republican, the converse is true. The Democrats are great at going out and registering people. And some of them are alive. So that they're actually going to get out to the polls and vote. So the Democrats have been expanding their base, and the Republicans have been just looking inwards and tightening up their base, securing their base. But you can see what happens. You can see what happened in 2018. Between the new registrants, between the illegal votes and the dead votes, they can creep past us. Even though we should be winning 2020, and I think we will, What I try to tell people is, do you want to leave it to chance? Republicans need to put on a ground game. They need to go knock on neighbors' doors. By the way, there's nothing more effective. There's no mailer, no phone call, no yard sign that's as effective as going and knocking on a neighbor's door, or a few, and discussing the election with them. There's nothing more effective. That's what the Democrats do. And we need to take a page out of their book. Here's the stern warning. Here's the part that's difficult to understand in some ways. When you go to various Republican groups around the state, as I've been doing, and I have a little PowerPoint presentation and I show them the data. Data almost sounds like a bad word these days, and even as a scientist, I hate using it, but I show them the information, the facts. And I explain to them it's not enough to just hold a barbecue or to just put on a spaghetti dinner. I mean, those things are good because they knit the group together. They keep people engaged. I'm not saying to not put on spaghetti dinners, but they raise very little money, and they're not turning votes. Because if you have 60 people in that room having spaghetti, you can bet that 59 or 60 of them are already hardcore Republicans. When I point this out to people, the replies that I get, either when I'm knocking on doors or when I'm going to Republican groups and speaking, is, well, we're not that comfortable knocking on doors, and we don't like to make phone calls. And the first few minutes of the conversation is great because everybody understands the knife's edge that we stand upon. They understand we could lose this republic. But if you ask them to go knock on a few doors, they're not comfortable. I'm here to tell you, my nephew served in Iraq. He wasn't comfortable dodging bullets and stepping over improvised explosive devices. My daughter served in the Navy, and she wasn't comfortable launching strikes in the Mideast off of her carrier. But they did it. And generations of men and women have gone out and fought for this country, dodging bullets and stepping over landmines. If they can do it to save this republic, we can. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. If you feel uncomfortable, you got to get over your shyness. If you need help,
Do it a few times.
yeah, do it. It's actually very easy.
Yeah.
And you
do
discover,
it.
you discover that you're talking to people, the chances are, who think like you. And in fact, I'll tell people now that if you need some help, if you want to organize like we're doing in Grafton County, and I'm involved with some organizational efforts around the state, if you want a little bit of help, a little nudge, a script, a little perspective, they can get in touch with me. I work with independent groups. I work alongside and with Republican Party, but still independently of the Republican Party. And they can contact me at markallegro@yahoo.com, and I'll plug them right in.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think people might take you up on that. But do you follow up with the people? Once you've trained them, okay, got them a little bit, do you check and see how well they're doing?
Well, right now, we are in the manpower building phase.
Right.
So we have a group that meets about once a month or once every 3 weeks. They meet in my house. Any given meeting will have anywhere between 15 and 25 people. And the phase that we're in right now is using the databases to go out and identify so-called hard Republicans, people that are liable to be activists, to increase our manpower. That's the first step. Eventually, we'll be going to speak to independents and to so-called soft, and even some Democrats.
Well-
Will we? So we follow up at the meetings. I will tell you that when we have a meeting, we don't talk about the old home days
No,
that we
you
had a
talk
booth
about
at.
what they did for
We
us.
talk about, okay, this is what we said we were going to do at last
Right.
meeting. A, B, and C were assigned these tasks. Give us a progress report. And then at the
good.
end of the day, we have new tasks. And I'm a follower-upper. Maybe a nagger would be a good word.
Well, you need a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Because we've tried doing this, we tried talking about organization before, and we go out and we have a good training session, and that's last you hear of it. Nobody follows up to see how well it was implemented.
No, you must. You must follow up. And we get that feedback when we have a meeting and we see new faces at the meeting. And
Well, what do you think about the concept of block parties or block members, where a person sort of heads up, I don't know, maybe 30 families in his area?
anything you could do to add to the organization is a plus. And if you could find 30 families for that block person to head up, people who won't say, oh, I can't because my nephew's coming up this weekend. Never mind that you're doing this for your nephew. Young lady or
And to
or
back it
gentleman.
up by having more people participate. Don't put it all on one person in
No,
an area.
that's a big message.
That's right.
And this is a little bit of a battle I have all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to a meeting and there's an events team or an outreach team, and it's 4 people, and it's the same 4 people, and we'll talk about doing 4 or 5 different things, and it's always everybody looking at them to do them. Nobody could do it. We have to ask people to do what they can do, not what they can't do, not more than they could do. That's why manpower is so important. We need to build a little manpower. We have a few
Right.
months to do that. That's the phase that we're in. Then we have a test coming up for us early next year. Those are the town elections.
Right?
It's a dry run, and it's also an opportunity for some positive feedback.
That's right.
So organize, do your dry run. I'm going to say my email address again. It's markallegro@yahoo.com, MarkAllegro, markallegro@yahoo.com. I'll plug you in. If it means directing you to the right people in the Republican Party or to some other group, I'll do that. But we'll get you into the organization. We have to win in 2020. We must.
You're right. And it's going to be a lot of work for everybody. And we ought to bring more people into the fold.
We have to.
a big tent.
We have to. And it's always been the same, even in the American Revolution. It was a small percentage of people who took the initiative and created this country. It was a small number of people who came over on the Mayflower.
Or the ones who wrote the Constitution. For
Exactly right. A committee of 5.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's very good. And maybe we'll have you back again sometime later in this year.
I'd love to let you know where things stand
That's
and to
right.
urge people as time goes by,
Good.
get involved. Thank you, Carl.
very much.